Welcome to Season Liberally. My name is Cecil. Today we're going to be making biscuits and gravy. Biscuits and gravy is one of those foods you make on rare occasions because it's an absolute calorie bomb. It's terrible for you, but it's wonderful comfort food, especially when you think, you know, the world might be falling apart. It's absolutely wonderful comfort food to have. I hope you stick around. I really, really love this recipe. So the first thing we got to do if we're going to make biscuits and gravy is we got to make the biscuits. And so I am going to show you the method that I learned, and I really like this method. It requires a couple of different things. The first, it requires pastry flour. Now don't freak out. You don't have to run out to the store and buy pastry flour. If you have cake flour and bread flour at home, you can make pastry flour. Pastry flour is it's got a little less protein than all-purpose flour. And so it's sort of, if you were to think about cake flour having the least amount of protein, therefore the least amount of gluten, and then bread flour having the most amount of protein or the most amount of gluten potential, in the middle of that is all-purpose flour. That's normally what we use. Pastry flour is just a hair towards cake flour. It's just a little less gluten, a little less protein, and it's one of those things that I think really makes this recipe. Now you absolutely can, if you want, substitute all-purpose flour. It's not a big deal. It shouldn't change the recipe too much, but I like using pastry flour for this particular recipe. So I'm starting with 20 ounces of pastry flour. This is by weight. I think that's like 4 cups, but I don't have a recipe that's in volume for this. I'm actually using 2 tablespoons of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. There's a lot of chemical leavener in this recipe. Really puffs up the biscuit. 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. And I'm using 8 ounces of butter in this. That's 2 full sticks of butter. And you want to make sure your butter is ice cold. When we do this with the biscuit method, we want to make sure that we cut our butter into our flour. And so it's got to be ice cold for that to really work well. And if it starts to get to the point where it feels like it's starting to get a little greasy, we want to put the entire bowl into the fridge or the freezer and let it sit for a few minutes and get nice and cold and then work it again. I'm going to show you how to use your hands to do this method today, but you can also use a food processor. It makes the work a lot faster. And I really love using a food processor for it, but I do want to show you how to use your hands to do this method because I think you can get just as good a result. It just takes a little longer. So we're going to get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to mix our dry ingredients. And so I have my pastry flour here. I'm going to mix in all the dry ingredients. So I have all my dry ingredients going in, and then I am actually going to get a whisk, and I'm going to whisk this. So now you can, if you want, sift this. I'm not going to sift it. I'm just going to give it a quick whisk. So my dry ingredients are ready. What I have here is a bit of really nice butter that I've cut. This is 2 ounces of butter. And I'm actually going to use this as to try to sort of laminate this a little later on, and I'll explain that. But I want to make sure that you know that if you wanted to try this method that I'm using today, you can either add all of your cold butter directly into this bowl, or you can add 6 ounces of butter to this and keep 2 ounces out at room temperature. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut the butter. So let me get the butter out. So what I have here is 6 ounces of butter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this 6 ounces of butter into small pieces. I'm using a bench scraper for this. You can use a butter knife if you want. I just want to make sure it's cut into small little squares. I'm going to add it into the bowl. All right, so here's how this works. I want to go through and start breaking up each one of those pieces. I cut them into small pieces. I want to go through and start breaking them up so that they're not together. Once I feel like they're not together, I'm going to start smashing them with my hands. And so I grab a piece and I squish it. I do the same, and I keep working my way through to smash down the bigger chunks of butter. So I'm just basically reaching in here and smashing the butter, smashing it into my fingers with the flour, and so it's basically falling apart into smaller, smaller, smaller pieces. And like I said, if this feels like it's starting to get a little too warm for you, if your kitchen's running a little hot that day, you want to make sure you keep this cold. If it feels like the butter is getting a little greasy, don't feel like you need to keep working on it. Push it into the fridge. The key to this recipe and the key to the biscuit method is that you are trying to coat each of these pieces of flour, or a lot of the flour, with this butter. And you're surrounding little pockets of butter with flour so that when it cooks, that butter starts to melt and releases steam. And so it won't stick together, and it creates these little pockets. And these little pockets of goodness are what makes a pastry flaky and delicious. And if you weren't going to do this, you would eventually just have like a little puck. If you were to just really, really smash this in and not care so much about it being cold, you would have a very thick, dense pastry in the end. And that's not what we want with biscuits. We want to make sure that they are very, very, very fluffy and that they have a lot of little pockets of flaky goodness in them. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my hands and I'm holding them like so. I'm picking up a bit of the flour and butter mixture, and I am pulling my other hand against it. And as I do that, I'm smashing the butter, and I'm creating these wonderful little pockets of butter in here, but I'm also smashing it in some ways very like microscopically. So there'll be a big piece, but then a lot of it will be rubbed directly into the flour, creating that sort of cornmeal consistency that we're looking for. And that cornmeal consistency, along with some of these bigger chunks of butter, is what gives the biscuit its structure as well as its flakiness. Now, this kind of method can be easily reproduced in a food processor by pulsing it. So if you take your butter and your flour and all your dry ingredients and you pulse it several times inside your food processor, you will wind up with a wonderfully cut in butter into your dough, and it'll be perfect. But I just wanted to show you that this is absolutely possible without a food processor. So now I'm working my way through, and if you look here, it's starting to look like cornmeal, and that's the consistency that we want. If we run our hands through here and we find any big, large pieces, we want to make sure that the biggest size piece in here is about the size of a pea. We don't want it any bigger than that. Big chunk of butter in there is just going to melt. It's not going to create a pocket in the pastry. Instead, it'll just melt and goo out the side, and you don't want that. You want to make sure that we create these little pockets. And there's an immense amount of butter in here. A lot of biscuits call for half the amount of butter that these have in them. So I'm feeling through, and I'm not feeling any really big pieces. I'm feeling, like size of the pea, something like that. That's a good size. And it's feeling like, when I hold it, it feels like rough cornmeal, and then there's little pieces of butter that I'm able to sift out of this. This is getting to be about perfect. So once that's done, what I want to do is I want to add my buttermilk. So this recipe requires buttermilk, but it's okay if you don't have buttermilk at home. You can make buttermilk. All you need is to take a tablespoon of white vinegar, put it in a measuring cup, and then fill the rest of that cup up with milk. Preferably whole milk if you have it, but you can also use 2%. Then you want to let it sit in your refrigerator. Give it a shake, let it sit in your refrigerator for about 15-20 minutes. It'll get thick, just like buttermilk will, and it'll have that acidity that you need. The reason why you need buttermilk is because we are using, in this recipe, we are using baking soda. Now, the baking powder will activate it a little bit, but we need the acidity from this buttermilk to activate that baking soda to its full potential. So that's why you need buttermilk for this. Also, buttermilk has that tanginess that you really just genuinely want in a biscuit. So that's why we're using it today. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, I'm not going to add all this liquid. This is a pint of buttermilk. I don't want to add a full pint of buttermilk to this. I'm going to add about 3/4 of this, and then I'm going to lightly toss it until it starts to come together. I'm going to be using my hands for this. Then once that's done, you can use a spoon if you want to, but I'm actually just going to use my hands. starting to come together here. You can see it's coming together in nice big clumps. It's still a little dry, so I'm going to add a touch more of this buttermilk to it. Still haven't used it all. Okay, it feels like it's about right. You can see that it's still got some dry parts in here. That's okay. When I turn this out, I may still add a little more buttermilk to this once it's out of the bowl. So it needs just a touch more. I'm going to add a little bit while it's on the counter here. A little more liquid is going to bring this right together. And there we go. I can feel it. Once you can feel it start to squish a little, you know you're good to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a block. I'm going to try to press it down into a block, and then I'm going to roll it out. And this is where the other butter is going to actually come in. So I'm going to try to get it all off my hands here as much as I can. Put it directly on top here. So now I'm just folding it, right? What I'm doing is folding it a little just to knead it, just a little. We don't need it to be kneaded a lot in this. We're only going to fold it a few times, but I want to knead it a little to make sure that it all comes together. And if you look, this dough is actually, since it's been a little earlier, just a few seconds ago, it was dry and it wasn't coming together. I folded it 2 or 3 times and it is now coming together really nicely. So now what I want to do is I want to roll it out nice and flat. Now I haven't used all my buttermilk. I still have, it looks like about maybe 2 ounces left, 3 ounces of buttermilk left. So now what I want to do is I want to roll this out nice and flat. I'm going to grab my rolling pin. So if it starts sticking your rolling pin, just put a little bit of flour on it. I want to roll it nice and flat here. And now I'm going to pull it up off the counter so I know it's not going to stick here. And I'm going to throw a little bit of flour underneath it so it doesn't stick. That's key. I don't want it to stick to the counter, and I want it to roll a little flatter than it is right now. So that's what I don't want to. I want to make sure it doesn't stick. I'm going to turn it a little bit. I'm going to take this butter and I'm going to slather it inside of here. So now that's going to make a beautiful little pocket of laminated dough inside of here. I'm taking this butter and just rubbing it all over the center of this. And we're going to have a gorgeous flaky biscuit when this is finished. So now I'm just going to fold it on top of itself here, like so. And then we are going to roll it out again. And I'm going to fold it one more time here. And what I'm doing is creating layers of butter throughout the biscuit. And so when the biscuit cooks, these layers of butter will be separated, and so you'll get those wonderful flaky layers that you get from a biscuit when you go buy it in like a really nice pastry shop, or when you go buy it at a southern diner. Now, we don't want to do this too much. We don't want to make sure that it's not going to, you don't want to keep rolling it into multiple times, because if you keep rolling it, you'll continue to make layers, but you're also going to continue to make it, it's going to be thinner and thinner and thinner each time, and you don't want that to happen. The key here is I want it to be about the size, I want it to be even thickness, but I want it to be about the size of 2 of these so I can get as much of this dough out as possible. Because when I roll this out the second time, those biscuits are not going to be as beautiful as these first cut biscuits. So get to the edge of the biscuit dough as far as you can. Now the key here is to press down and don't turn. You do not want to turn. If you turn, then you basically glue the dough together around the outside and it doesn't rise as much and it might rise unevenly. So we want to just go straight down. That's the key. You just go straight down and there's your biscuit. Now you get as close as you can to the next one and as close to the edge as you can. And we're just going to cut out each one of these. And like I said, the dough, I'm going to roll the rest of this dough out, but it's not going to be as good as these first few biscuits that come out of here. Let's see if we can get one out of this corner. Oh, it's a little off, but it's close. And now we're going to smash the rest of this together. We're going to get a couple more biscuits out of this. Now this, like I said, is not going to be as beautifully laminated as the other pieces that we've already made. That's okay. Every biscuit is beautiful. And I'm trying not to knead this as much so I can keep as many of those layers as possible. If you wanted to, you could just knead the hell out of this and incorporate all that butter back into this biscuit. That's perfectly fine. But I'm trying not to do that to try to preserve as many of the layers as I can. So you can see this one's going to have like a little weird little nubule on the edge of it. But that's okay. It's still going to be a wonderful tasting biscuit. That one might be for the cook. So now I've seen recipes where people base the top of their biscuits with butter. You're certainly welcome to try to do that. I'm not going to do that. I think that these have enough butter in them already. So I'm going to put these on a pan here, and they do not have to be spaced out super far. They should only rise upward, hopefully. So these are going to go into an oven. This oven is 400 degrees convection, 425 conventional. And we're going to cook them. We're going to start checking them around 14, 15 minutes. We're going to make the gravy now. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this. And there's, sawmill gravy with bacon and onions and sausage, pork sausage. I've seen people throw garlic. I've seen all kinds of stuff. But really, I want to try to limit all of my mise en place to the time that my biscuits are in the oven. And it's only about 15 minutes. So what I'm doing is I'm actually just going to make a real simple version for you today with a few additives. You can, of course, saute onion in here if you want, add a little garlic. That's totally fine. I got my pan nice and hot, and I'm adding mild pork sausage. Now, you can use hot pork sausage, but what I'm going to do is actually add a little bit of hot to it to my particular taste. And so that's always a great way to do it if that's the way you want to do it. You could also just buy the hot sausage if you like. So now I want to brown this up. And normally what you'll do when you're browning this up is you're getting the oil to release from this. And so that's what we're going to try to do is render out as much of the oil as possible. And when we do that, we're going to be creating a roux with that with flour. And so you normally would use butter and flour for a roux, but we're actually using the pork fat here. But if there isn't enough fat or it doesn't look like there's enough fat, I can always add butter to this or another oil to this. I would add butter and then pour some flour in it. Now for a pound, which is what this is, a pound of pork sausage, I'm using 1/4 cup of flour for this. Now, I also have here, like I said, I'm going to add a little heat to this, and now this is heat to my particular palate. These are Aleppo peppers. These are really wonderful spicy peppers. They have a great taste to them. I'm going to add this about 1/2 teaspoon of them. I'm going to wait until it's almost cooked though. And so what I'm doing now is just browning it. I didn't add any oil to the pan because I didn't want to add any other types of oil to this. So there's no oil in the pan, and I'm just going to see how much oil comes out of this, how much fat renders out of this. Now, you can also add other additives. I've seen a lot of other types of spices get added. I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of Tony Chachere's Cajun seasoning to this, but you can add whatever you like. If you just want to add salt and pepper, that's perfectly fine. Literally, you could just add flour, salt, pepper, and it's perfectly fine gravy. Sausage, pork sausage has a lot of flavor. So don't worry if you don't feel like you want to add a bunch of additives. Heck, you don't want to start cooking this in the morning for your family. Get your biscuits ready and start and then have a giant process to create a sawmill gravy that takes hours and you're not eating until brunch. You certainly don't want to do that. That simple is fine with this dish. So I might get a little loud. I have to turn on my exhaust fan. Now what's coming out of this is steam. There's a lot of steam, a lot of water content in this pork sausage. And I want to make sure I break it apart into nice little chunks. You almost want it to be like a ground meat sort of hamburger type consistency when it's done. If they're big chunks, you want to make sure everything is brown and it's completely cooked. And I'll be damned if there isn't enough butter in here and isn't enough fat in here. It's starting to render, and I'm going to let it go for a few more minutes, but it certainly doesn't look like there's enough in here. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit to see if I can render some more fat out of this. You want about 4 tablespoons of fat in here. So if there's not enough fat, I'll add a couple tablespoons of butter. Now the concept here is I'm making a roux with this. It's essentially a roux. It's not as complicated as most roux, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add flour to this, and then the flour is going to get coated in all that fat, and then when I add my cold liquid to it, it's going to then create a nice sauce. If I don't really pay attention here and whisk very well and get all the flour coated with fat, then what's going to happen is it's going to be lumpy, and you don't want a lumpy sauce. So I don't know what I did. Maybe I bought low-fat pork sausage. I don't know, but there's not enough fat in here. I am going to add a little butter to this because I want to make sure that all my flour is covered. And right about now, I'm going to add my Aleppo peppers to this. If you're adding hot pepper at all, pepper flakes or something, wait until it's cooked up. You don't want to burn that pepper flakes. So now I have whole milk here. I'm going to use mostly whole milk, but I am going to add a little bit of half and half to this. Why would I add half and half? Well, 1, it's not health food, that's why. And 2, the ice caps are melting, and I need a little comfort food right now. So half and half will add a beautiful, beautiful flavor to this. It's gonna add a nice, rich creaminess that you're gonna love. So now, as you can see in here, everything's nice and brown. And there's a little bit, you could see the bottom is coated with fat. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that the bottom has enough fat on it so that when I add this flour to it, it's actually going to create a roux. And so that's what we want, and that's what we're going to do. We're adding the flour right now. And now I'm going to use a whisk to just try to stir this up as best I can. Now the real concept here is that I want to try to coat all this flour, as much of this flour as I can, with this, with the fat that's in the pan. And as I do that, you're going to see it dries up. It's going to dry up in here. And that's what we want. Now, whenever you make a sauce, if you're going to have hot roux, you have to have cold liquid. If you have hot liquid, you want to have a cold roux. They always have to be opposite, or they're going to lump up on you. In this case, this is a hot roux inside of this. I'm going to add my seasoning right now. So here I go. I'm going to add a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of this whole milk. And I want to whisk when I do it. So it's going to start to thicken. I'm going to add my cream now. And now this will take as much as it needs. You're just going to have to eyeball this. As I'm stirring, I'm just stirring to make sure that I'm incorporating it all and not having any lumps in here. And it's going to take as much as it needs. You're going to start to see it. It's going to start to swell as it boils. And as it starts to boil, you're just going to look at it and say, is that the consistency that I want? What you want is nappe consistency. It needs to coat the back of a spoon. You don't want it to be thick. So thick that it's not going to coat the biscuit. It's just going to sit. You can see it's starting to swell up right now. It's too thick. This is too thick. You do not want it to be this thick. And so I'm gonna add a little bit more milk and stir it up. I don't ever want it to get to where it's like a paste. That's not gonna be helpful. So I'm just gonna add a little more milk. Just keep adding milk until I think it's the right consistency. And then once it boils and you know it's boiled, then you know all of the starch has gelatinized. It has swelled up to where it needs to be, and that's going to be the starch is your thickener in this. The flour is your thickener in this. And once all that starch has gelatinized and boiled, then you know it has come up to the proper temperature, and you know it's going to be about as thick as that's about as thick as it's going to get. So this is about right. I'm going to add a splash more. I don't want to get it too loose, but I also don't want it to be thick. I don't want it to feel like it's thick on there. This is a gravy. This isn't, you know, this isn't a, you don't want a piece of gravy. You want a pour gravy. One more tiny little splash, and I think it's finished. All right. So there we go, that's our gravy. Now, I want to keep this nice and warm until my biscuits come out, but I want to taste it. I got to make sure it tastes right, see what the flavor tastes like, and see if it needs any seasoning, salt and pepper, that sort of thing. I don't think it needs anything. I think it's perfect. The seasoned salt I added was about I added about a half a teaspoon of seasoned salt, and I think that was kind of perfect. If you didn't add that, maybe you hit it with a shot of salt when it's done. But that pork sausage has a ton of salt in it. So, all right, biscuits are done. These are, as you can see, nice and tall. Some of the ones that got used a little later, the ones that got made a little later, those ones are. They are different. They are not as perfect as the other ones, but all biscuits are perfect. And I am not gonna form shame these biscuits. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take 2 of these uglier biscuits. Thank you very much. And we're gonna pour a little bit of this gravy on top. And now I got to be real honest, I absolutely love a sort of over medium egg over all this to just smash into that, but I didn't make any over medium eggs. I'm just going to try the biscuits and gravy together here. This is wonderful, and the gravy's marvelous. It does have a little bit of heat to it because I added that Aleppo pepper, so it's got just this tiniest bit of heat, which I like. And then it's pork sausage and half. How could it be bad? So this is absolutely a wonderful meal. I want to show you, though, what one of these looks like. One of these biscuits looks like. So this is what the biscuit will look like. And I want to taste the biscuit on its own, just so I can tell you what the biscuit tastes like on its own. So I'm going to break it open here. And so you can see it has all those layers. And the reason why it has these layers is because of the folding process that we did, the laminating process. This is why American biscuits are so amazing. Biscuits in the UK are cookies. So if you're watching this from the UK, you're thinking, why do you keep calling these biscuits? Well, American biscuits are almost like a savory scone. But they're a little lighter. And in this case, what's amazing about this is how delicate the biscuit is when it's finally cooked. It almost falls apart, but it also feels really hearty too. Like it feels, when you pick it up, it feels dense and it feels hearty, but the moment you bite into it, it's airy and it just falls apart. It's absolutely wonderful. It just turned out perfect. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, like and subscribe below. There's a little bell. You can get notifications when I launch a video. I also put up a poll in the discussion section for anyone who's interested in the Season Liberally 101 section that I've been creating. I put together a few options, a few ideas for a new video that I might make there. And so whatever gets the most votes, I'm gonna choose that one. So if you're interested in that series, you can go to the discussion section just below and you can click on which one you'd like to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you make this. And if you do, let me know in the comments below.